All right, everyone, thanks for joining us here. We're going to be talking about staking economics. We're getting a little bit of a late start, but I don't think that'll be an issue. So, getting right into it. So, I'd like to start off by just kind of explaining about why it is that we are doing some validator incentives, or what the economics are behind becoming a validator on the RChain network. So what exactly is a network in the first place? Well, it's a bunch of computers running on the internet doing some kind of useful task. Let's see here. Looks like we are not seeing things. There we go. Great. Awesome. Right. So one thing we've seen from recent kind of blockchain 3 type technologies, getting a network off the ground is not super easy. Right? So we can learn from those challenges that we've seen in other networks to maybe do some things a little bit differently. And so at the co-op, we knew that we had interest in validation in staking the network, being a proof of stake network. We weren't exactly sure how many folks were actually going to show up, right? So it was decided that we're going to take a little bit of initiative here, and we're going to offer some discounts on the existing staking token called ROC to get this network to have a bit more certainty about how many people we might expect or how many validators we might expect to show up. And so when thinking about what kind of discount that might look like, we kind of thought, well, it's got to be somewhat decent off of an existing market price. So we kind of landed on somewhere between like a 20–21% discount. Okay. And we think that that is actually going to drive a ton of people into this program so that about 70% is, by our estimates, are going to be coming in from this validator program that might not have already been there in the first place. Because we are targeting something like 1,000 nodes to begin with, or at least within the next year or so, just to stand up this network in a kind of properly decentralized manner. And from there, it should hopefully grow organically, and then we should see that scale out as the economics sort of play out on their own. The other option would have been to do something like purchasing a ton of our own hardware, deploying that on to connect onto the network, but that would have just sort of defeated the purpose, really. You don't really want to launch out your network with a bunch of PCs or a bunch of computers that you control yourself. So that's what we were trying to avoid. So the number we eventually came up with was something like 10% of total supply of outstanding ROC tokens, which in this case is about 80 million ROC. And to put that in perspective, I did some research on what other types of organizations tend to spend on, call it like, say, security for either their networks or for, at the country level, the United States spends about 15% on defense. That's not exactly the same thing as, say, network security, but it gives us a rough idea of what the top end of what you might want to spend for something kind of like this. And at the low end, from Forrester's research, about 2.7% of IT budgets are spent on network security. So that seems like, well, corporations, from what we all know, tend to spend maybe a little bit less on security than maybe we would like. So somewhere in between there is something like 8.8% or so. And so our 10% of kind of outstanding token supply seems to match well between those two extremes. Okay. So the rewards that we're going to be looking at today, there kind of falls into 3 buckets. Discounts, seniorage, or sometimes called like interest or issuance, and then the last being transaction fees. So discounts is something that we're offering immediately off of a spot price of the staking token, and this will be offered as to incentivize people to join now, because we want to know as soon as possible how much stake we have and how many validators we have going forward, so that the network is robust and secure from the very beginning. The pricing discounts, they scale with the amount of stake that you're willing to bond into the network, and we'll go into more detail about that, but it is a sliding range. But also important to note, we our interest here is to attract validation. So this is not just a token sale. It is also, if you are an existing ROC holder and want to stake the network, maybe you already plan to stake the network, but you feel a little bit like you've been out in the cold because how would you participate in a sale? You don't have any more maybe crypto you'd want to put towards this. We are going to offer the same sort of incentives for folks who already own the ROC, which means if you come to us with your existing ROC and you make the same agreement the rest of the validators are agreeing to, and lock it and commit, then you will get that same discount, the same sliding discount we're offering for ROC sales, and we'll go into some more details about what that looks like. So once the network actually goes live, then we're going to be issuing a seigniorage. Most importantly will be, well, what is the rate? What rate are we looking at? And we did get quite a lot of feedback on this particular number, but we eventually landed on a 7% rate. That's over the first 18 months of the network. And that should be noted that the bond period for these is 6 months. So it would be 3 6-month periods at which we'd be offering a 7% discount or a 7% seigniorage. This would be new tokens created as a result of validating effort. And these would be distributed roughly on a monthly basis to all those validating pools. Finally, we want to be moving into a place where the network is sustained by transaction fees alone. So this is designed to be a scaled network. This is designed to have heavy user traffic. And so those fees should be supporting the validating efforts. And that's eventually where we want to go, but we do know it's going to take a little bit of time in order to get there. All right, so here's what that looks like in terms of the tiers of the discounts. So on the bottom left there, from $1,500 to about $250,000, that's going to be a straight 18% discount. And then on top of that, you'll have that 3%, which is, well, we had the discounts in gray there. Those are the discounts for the different levels, and then everyone receives the same base. That's what that is here. And so between $250,000 to just under $1 million, that is 18% plus the 3, so you've got your 21. And the final would be like a 6% plus your discount plus 18, so you got your 24. For some comparisons from other networks that are offering some seigniorage or early incentives for validating networks, you have a bit of a range across the different type of platforms, where Dash is fairly similar and where Cosmos is kind of out on their own a little bit there. But it is pretty consistent amongst the market, so we do think that that's a good number to start out with. And then coupled on top of that discount that you'd be getting up front now, it makes the whole proposition much more attractive for early validators. Then as the network matures, we'll see text fees take off. And right now we're targeting a third of what Ethereum is charging, roughly speaking, trying to drive down to a 10th in terms of transaction fees. But we're targeting volumes of transactions much, much higher than that. Right now we're targeting at mainnet launch somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 40,000 transactions per second. Okay, so getting into some finer grained details, I'm going to turn it over to Mrinal. And this slide, I think you actually have that in Excel, right? You're going to bring that up? Yeah, okay, so here you go.
Hi, everyone. Before I bring up the Excel, just want to give some context on why this is a stopping point before we go into transaction fees. If you think about seigniorage plus the upfront discount, these are guaranteed returns to validators. You receive this return to your underlying token investment irrespective of what happens to transaction fees. So this is your locked-in return. We'll talk about that first, and then we'll talk about how transaction fees will be divvied up. So this Excel sheet, which will be posted up on the GitHub once we've finished full legal review, has 3 tabs. So I'm going to talk about the first 2 tabs first. One is a validator sale participant and the existing holder sale. So a validator sale participant, in this example, let's say has put $2 million in. You can see the starting conditions up top. And this just has the discount tranches and the seigniorage levels. There's an effective monthly simple rate, because as Kenny described, monthly is going to be the target when the additional tokens will be delivered into your unbonded wallet. So consider this example where someone puts in $2 million. If the price of rock was 40 cents, a 24% discount takes you to about 30 cents, and 6.6 million tokens is sort of what you receive. Let me set this to 0. So if you set the price increase of the rock token to 0, here's a schedule that shows you exactly the internal rate of return you get. I'm just going to go over a few key cells because most of them just repeat 18 times. But your starting conditions are there's an inflow into the system of $2 million, and you get these tokens in exchange. So for the investor, there's a cash outflow of $2 million. All this is, and then based off of this, there's additional tokens granted off of seigniorage driven by this number, which is the effective monthly rate. And these are cashed out, so it's simple interest treatment, not compounding interest treatment. And at 40 cents a rock, that's what the cash flow is worth. So you drive this all the way down, and then you have an exit amount when you take the entire stake out. And the reason why this is higher than 2 million is because you bought these at a 24% discount, plus the last month of interest. So let's just do, so what does it look like if, rock prices actually did go up? You see at a 12% rate where you get to close to previous all-time highs at about $3, the returns start looking absurd, but we wanted to ensure that you have this locked-in 30% IRR and about just under 1.5 times money on money regardless. I'm going to pause here for a second if there are any questions before I go on to the next example. All right, great. Sorry about that. Yep.
And this just assumes no appreciation.
Yes, what's loaded right now is no appreciation in price. Yeah, the 29.78% return. Now, it could go the other way too. If you believe rock goes down, you get less than that. But there's 30% appreciation on the core underlying token. So how does this work for an existing rock holder? So say an existing rock holder who says, I want to stake 5 million rock, and we know that today's price of rock is 40. So effectively, the committed dollar amount becomes 2 million. The reason why you have to have a committed dollar amount is we just want to use the exact same table. And then you get a bonus applied. And now you might ask, why is this 31% and not 24%? It's just because, when it's a 24% discount, it goes into the denominator. So it's really just keying off of the previous table. So they get 31% more tokens, which is this amount. Now, practically, the way that will work is that will be held in a wallet, so you'll be able to see it, and then the co-op will transfer that amount over at bonding. So the IRR calculation works exactly the same way. Assume at bonding, you get your existing and bonus tokens, and then going forward, you get the exact same return of 29.78%. And this was constructed just to ensure that your return on the underlying token is exactly the same in both scenarios, as long as you take your starting dollar amount as day of execution. I'm going to pause there and see if there were any questions on this.
Thanks, Chris. Just getting back to the point that Kenny had made, where we want 10% of that outstanding rocks or red to be available to support funding that, that $1,000 number. These are just theoretical values, right? Nobody's going to be staking this amount and go along with that.
Let me draw a nuance there. So the question is, especially numbers like 2,000, et cetera, seem purely theoretical because it's quite unlikely that someone would stake that on a single node, for example. So there's actually a two-part question to that answer. One, you'd be surprised. There are some really large holders that are in the millions of rock, and so we're getting requests for that all the time, either existing holders or people who want to purchase in those numbers. But the second part to that answer is there will be maximums defined within shards and in the root shard. So even if you want to stake 10 million rock, you probably need to set up more than one node just to prevent abuse in the system. And so while you can run it on the same machine, it probably needs to be a much more powerful machine to actually have several instances of a node. And there will be individual wallets at that point. Did that answer the question? Oh.
Question about the 6-month lockup period.
Yep.
So at the end of the 6 months, what does that mean? So if I stake, 100,000, I can take that out?
Yes. Yeah. You can take it out or choose to rebond.
Right.
Yeah. But if you take it out, yeah,
Because in 6 months, there's going to be an event, right? Because everybody's going to try to cash out, right? At least partly to recoup some of their expenses, right? So how is that going to work?
So the question is, 6 month, it's a 6 month bond, not a 6 month lock, or it's the same thing. But if that would mean you immediately unbonded as soon as you right? And then it moves into that other wallet. So at that point, that's not much value to you. But I think maybe what your question is there a danger that at some point everybody's going to cash out at the same point in time? Yeah, of course that's a risk, but we're also, if you're looking at the returns that you've made over that 6 months and you're like, all right, this is it, yeah, that we could see a spike in unbond and bond, but also likely we'd be seeing additional traffic to the network. We'd be seeing other points of economics increasing so that other folks are going to be wanting to come and join, right? And this is a continual effort. It's not just like a one and done type of thing. Even if it's not part of a sale or a part of a particular program, validation is a huge part of what's going to make this network actually work.
And just one small additional point to that, the 7% seigniorage that's granted, that's spendable monthly, because that's in an external unbonded wallet, so you can spend that whenever you want.
So the question was, given that there are some minimums and maximums for staking, doesn't that mean if you have a large stake that you're going to be forced to either have multiple nodes or stake in multiple shards? Yes, absolutely. In fact, that's kind of the reason why we do have minimum and maximums, and is that it will encourage that kind of behavior. So we do want people to spread out through the network as well, to start validating in smaller corners of the network as well, but then also providing additional hardware as well. So that's kind of the incentive there. And we do, that was on purpose. And we don't want you to be able to just take a large pool of tokens and put them in one place that's not actually adding a lot of value to the network. Yeah, there'll be, so the question is, I understand that there's going to be a limit per shard. Now the shard, it's actually like a minimum maximum, so if it's the same, then there's going to be one limit, or there's some range. But that's up to the people in that shard to decide, and how often to update that. The one that will be likely the most strict will be like the root shard, because we want that one to be generally inclusive, right? But also sort of like still have some skin in the game. So, but those are sort of undetermined amounts, but those are set at like Genesis for either a shard or the root.
I guess my getting at is that in order to understand your real return, you have to understand your costs.
Yes.
And so that would be determined by the amount of hardware.
Yeah, so this is a business. So the question was, I guess your return is also going to depend on your cost. And your costs are going to be things like hardware, bandwidth, administrative costs, all those types of things. And absolutely, so part of this validation sale that we're producing, you have to provide us with a plan for that, actually. So a hardware provisioning plan, like how are you going to keep this stuff up? We want to know that too, as stakeholders in this network. But absolutely, it is a point of cost, and it's likely to be thought of. It's best to think of it as a business, I think, where you have potential returns on investment.
Okay, so this is going to be available before the mainnet, obviously. Where is the RHOC then kept that we lock?
So was the question, where is the seniorage kept?
Okay, so if I understood this correctly, like if I already have a pile of RHOC and I want to benefit from the discount agreement, right, then I have to sign, okay, so you phrased it as, I think, sign a contract?
Yep.
Okay, so do I then lock my RHOC into a contract on Ethereum in the meanwhile, or how does that work?
Okay, so was the question, I have existing staking tokens,
I have existing RHOC now, today, on Ethereum.
or I want to get them? And what happens to them now between now and mainnet?
Yeah, so if I want to participate in this offer, do I need to?
Yeah, so we have a couple different options there. So we are using existing legal contracts in jurisdictions where we know we have recourse. And in that case, we don't actually require the validator to move tokens around. But in jurisdictions where we don't have recourse, or it would be exceedingly difficult, then that's not the case. So far, we haven't actually run into this yet. So it's been paper contracts.
Okay, so paper legal contract with the co-op.
Yes. So yeah, either you as an individual or as some business entity enters into a contract that you sign, and then if you don't fulfill that, then that's a breach of contract, and then the whole legal process would take over from there.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Any other questions before we move on? All right, I'll step back into PowerPoint. I don't know why it does that. All right, there we go. So there's 3 return examples. Okay, so let's talk about how transaction fees are going to be split across validators. And this is fairly important given that this is where the proof of stake mechanism really starts working. I mean, the seniorage is also based on stake, but this is a fairly important part of it. And for people out there, just so you know, this document, the Excel file, and the latest legal contracts will all be posted to the GitHub, and we'll share the links to that on Telegram as well as Discord. So don't worry, all these documents will go up, and everyone will have access to it. They'll be fully public. So before I talk about how transaction fees are split exactly, let me define a few key variables. Key variable 1 is N, which is the number of validators. K is a shard-specific fee structure parameter. Think about it as the bonus that goes to the block producer. So that's what K is. Fee is the proposed transaction fee. Now within a shard, that might be fixed, or it.
Is the bonus paid to block producers? That's like to encourage people to run applications, or?
It's so that you can't be a lazy, like, passive validator. You have to propose blocks as well. Yeah, like just. I mean, you could choose to, but you just wouldn't make as much reward.
Is the proposed going to be built in to deploy at some point? Or, like, I'm just wondering what the intended future state of what that looks like for my node made a proposal. Is it the node? Is it the person operating the node?
It's the node. It should ideally, it's parameters. It's all configurable. It's not. Yeah, it's a config file, so you'd set up the configuration you want. No one needs to actively be monitoring this stuff. You sort of set your comfort levels, you know what the SLA within the shard is, and as long as you're compliant with that, you know, you're fine. And you can choose how much of a reward or not you want to take. Well, were there any other questions before I moved on? Fee is the proposed transaction fee. And this will be either proposed by block proposer B, or it's pre-proposed. You might have shards where fee is fixed for certain transactions. Again, depends on the SLA. And so there's 2 levels of transaction fee calculated, or I'd say weights calculated here. That's B and E. B is the block proposer. E is every validator that is not a block proposer. So there's N-1 E's. And so the 2 equations are, as you can see, B is 1 plus k into phi over n plus k, and e is just phi over n plus k. Don't concentrate too much on those formulas, but really what's important to consider there is as k goes to infinity, the block producer is getting all the phi. As k goes to 0, they're being shared completely evenly. So if you set k to 0 there, you'll see it's just phi over n for everyone. So really that's all k does. It sort of defines a bonus for the producer. And within each shard, people can agree to it or change it if they submit it as a contract to the shard and everyone approves it. So that's step one. To this point, all we've done is decided what the producer gets, block proposer gets, versus a plain validator. We've not weighted it for stake. And so the way we weight it for stake is we've got wx, so let's say b and e gives you wx for every validator x. And then each validator x also has a stake equal to s of x. And so finally, phi for validator x is phi of x is equal to the total phi times its weight times its stake divided by the sigma of the weights and stakes of all the validators within that shard. Let me show you how it works in Excel. So there's an Excel, we've loaded this into an Excel file with an example. Given how Excel works, we have to set fixed. You can't really vary n because that's how many rows you want to set. You can do it with a macro. It gets really messy. So just assume n is equal to 10. We have 10 validators. We've set k to 3. And we've set phi at 1,000. And again, 1,000 is you just want a high number to see how it shakes out. So you can see here that B gets 307 units, and each of E gets 77 units, roughly. And so here, that's the weight for each of them. So you can see this adds up to 1,000. So we've proportioned this 1,000 weight across these depending on whether they're a proposer or not. And let's say this is how much rock each one of them has staked on those nodes. And everything in blue is changeable, so I could change this to 10,000 now, and the whole thing re-updates. So the weight times stake for each one is the output here. And then you re-spread the phi based on weight times stake. And this is what each of them gets paid. As you can see, the block producer still gets, in this case, because k is equal to 3, one of the largest fees, but someone who's just a validator with a significant stake of 20,000 rock here gets a fee that's quite similar. And so, as I said, as this tends to 0, you can see that weight balances out across everyone, and as it tends to infinity, which is not a real number, but more or less, you see you see that the block proposer gets all of the reward. And again, this Excel will be shared with everyone, so anyone who wants to take a crack at testing that, feel free to. Any questions? So at the root shard, it'll probably be not a very high number. So we want some incentive, but it'll probably not be a very high number. Within a shard, it's set by the members of the shard, right? When you're starting up a shard, all of you agree to a K in your SLA, and then to modify it, you submit a smart contract saying, I want to change K, and then every other validator has to validate that. And changing of key variables will, of course, have a different procedure and configuration system than standard transaction management.
What would be the logic for that within this shard? I assume that some validators would have a preference for like a lower K or a higher K. What would be the dynamic that?
Yeah, so I can give you a great example for higher K. So imagine you're an IoT startup that just needs a lot of load footprint. You want to be validating you just want to have a validator in every geography just so you can see the traffic within that geography and figure out ping rates and things like that. But you don't want to spread that much of your, you don't care if K is high, you want someone else to propose the block. You don't want to put that much, because if you're proposing a lot, there's more computational cost than if you're merely validating. So you really don't want to have the financial outlay for that much processing cost, and you're fine taking a smaller reward because maybe, as an IoT provider, you already have a lot of outlay. You just want a bit of a dummy node out there and you want to put a small stake on it, and you're fine with a high K. In fact, you want a high K because you want to incent other people to pick up your slack, if you will, to validate on the node. So guys who kind of act like where you have two participants, like backbone person and non-backbone person, that's when you really want a high K. On the other hand, if you think everyone in that system or within that shard or use case is a peer and should be doing an equal amount of work, for example, say it's a securitization platform and all you're doing is transforming deeds for securities, be it bonds or whatever. There you can't really see any logic for one person having a higher or lower role in validating those transactions. It's in everyone's interest to have it. So there I'd say you'd imagine K would be closer to 0. Did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. Does it mean that, so in either case for the user, that the final fee that you pay will be the same, right?
Correct.
Matter of fact distribution.
Correct. Yeah, the user, it doesn't make a difference what the number K is. Yeah, it just matters to the validators. Any other questions? All right. Sorry, it always does that. It's been one of those days. I've had a myriad of tech issues. Okay, so let's talk about transaction fee expectations and what happens to transaction fees over time. Again, please note, all of this is purely illustrative, but if you think about what we're doing early on, we're seeding the economics to become a validator with the upfront discount on the purchases, the upfront ROC distribution for current holders who stake, as well as seniorage. But as the network grows, two things happen, right? Volume increases rapidly, but also transaction costs go down, volume increases rapidly, but your hope is that the transaction rate has gone up so highly that the total quantum of transaction fees, not fee per transaction, suddenly becomes a very significant part of the economics to a validator. So over time, we hope that transaction and storage fees will become the main source of ongoing economics versus seniorage. And as you see on the bottom left there, again, purely illustrative, out the gate, seniorage will definitely be 90% plus. At least, and we're not saying for the whole year, but for a few months as people are still building out their infrastructure, testing it, et cetera. But over time, we expect that to change significantly. And the policy of the co-op in general will be to maintain outcomes that are neutral to superior economically. Like, you don't care about the mix that much because it means the same thing to the validator as what they're getting now. And some of the factors that will be considered while governing this balance is transaction volume, transaction cost, and percent of token supply that's currently staked. Let me talk about why the percent of token supply that's currently staked is fairly important. I think one of the big concerns people had was there's a 7% seniorage rate. Does that mean that token supply increases by 7% every year? And the answer is no. It's 7% times staked supply. And since we're targeting about a 10% staked supply versus total supply, that's actually 0.7%. So how much we can move that seniorage number to make sure that we're ensuring good economic outcomes really depends solely on, a lot on how much is staked. There's some resources at the end of the deck. There's a great blog post by Kenny to walk through the steps on becoming a validator. All the validator documentation is on GitHub. If you just go to the RChain GitHub and just type in validator, you'll get into that link, so you don't need to memorize that. And then, of course, all our technical documentation is on developer.rchain.coop. I'm going to answer some very general questions that we've got, and this FAQ will keep being updated. One, is bonding an open process? yes, it's an open process. It's not you can only bond during this period, but you submit a transaction, it gets approved, and then you're bonded for 6 months. How long will the upfront discount be given to existing ROC holders? It's as long as the sale continues. And we think it'll occur through their launch of mainnet. We might finish a little before that. So people who are existing ROC holders who want to stake and get the bonus should do it. All shards will have the same level of economic incentive out the gate, other than transaction and storage fees, of course. And there's one class of validators called backbone validators, and will they only be in the high stakes pool? And we think most likely there's not going to be really a limitation of who can get in or not, but the hardware requirements will probably make it kind of impractical to try and be there without putting together a significant hardware. And just on hardware, we gave a general specification for what a backbone node would look like. Those will be significantly more expensive than what you need to just run a regular node, but this slide will be updated often as the validator sale continues. Please view this document and the Excel as both living documents where we'll keep updating them and posting them up to the GitHub and letting the community know that there's been something additionally committed to it, because we just want this set of documents to be the official repository for all questions. That's the end of the presentation. And any questions?
So the question was, do we have any idea about how much those text fees or storage fees might compare to existing networks? Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to say because no current blockchain out there is going to be as performant as RChain will be, right? So that's orders of magnitude different. But if you, and then we're going to try to drop the text fees to a tenth, let's say, of that of Ethereum. So, well, but the total fees, how are they going to be similar? Well, I can't say exactly how much they're going to be, but but I can say where they have to be. They have to be enough in order to support the hardware itself, right? And plus probably some profit so that people will continue to do so. If not, then the network will shrink. If it increases more, then that will, more hardware will come into the network and more, the rewards will be spread out a bit more. So, something like that. Yeah, the idea here is, the comment was if the transaction throughput is 10 times as good, you'd want the fees to be a tenth, so that you'd have the same level but at a much higher economic value, I guess you'd say. But it is important to note that there are limits to that. We can't just make magic happen here without real CPUs running with in data centers someplace. I'm gonna go here and then we'll go back to Karen.
Just in terms of the backbone validators, what is the target number for those? So how many of those is the co-op aiming for at the moment?
Oh, the co-op? The co-op actually will be running validation.
Actually, the question is more like how many do we expect in the network?
Backbones?
Yeah, backbone.
That's a great question. So the backbones are designed to create sort of these almost like a mesh network, so that the highest throughput is kind of going through these areas. We'd want them to be a bit geographically diverse. So don't sort of quote me on this, but I'm thinking somewhere in the order of 10, right? So roughly geographically spread out, but connected well enough so that the communication is performant.
Okay.
Karen? Yeah, so the question is, will there be more detail about the specifications, the hardware specifications needed for specialized shards or specialized applications to garner special fees? And that is probably going to have to come with a little bit of experimentation. You know, as we talk to Pyrofex about the questions like this, the immediate response we usually get is, that's not the way it works. You have to actually like deploy something first and test it to see what it's going to be. But we can make some really kind of bare bones guesses to things, and that's kind of what's in the summary, which is in one of these documents previously. But everybody here running like the test network knows that it's a bit RAM intensive, right? So we know already that just doing bootstrapping the network itself is about 16 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of RAM is what you need, and probably, I don't know how many CPUs you guys were running, but probably at least 4, right? So imagine that anything more performant than that, you're going to have to scale that up. That's probably where I'd start from there, and then kind of work out. But you'd likely know some of that information before joining one of these shards, before they get stood up. And it's going to be a while before we actually see really compelling use cases for shards, I think. 6 to maybe 8 months after launch. But right now, at the beginning, the root shard is probably the easiest one to understand and do anything with, which is, we have some idea about what that might be.
Awesome. Go ahead.
I'm not sure if like it's going to be, but are we thinking so for the beginning, the senior rate, so like the subsidy in a sense, is driving most of the economics, right? So are we competing against other platforms that have maybe shittier kind of technology but higher subsidies in a sense to keep
Yeah, the highest quartile guaranteed return is like in the high 20s. So there's two ways to do it, right? There's seniorage or there's an upfront discount. Other platforms are not doing the upfront discount. The reason we're doing the upfront discount is for two reasons. One is so that we can sort of bootstrap network validation. It's very hard to get 1,000 people to set up nodes if you don't give them something in return, right? You're asking for a pretty gargantuan effort. And so we view that 21% discount as, so, when the co-op was making the decision, like, hey, do we, sort of take a hit on a 20-ish% discount, or do we just go spend the money and just set up those nodes? Turns out more expensive to set up those nodes, and no one's going to trust the network because it's owned by one entity. So the idea was like, let's have an organic spread. And so that's why we have a large discount. But the other reason we have a large discount is we wanted low seniorage. We did not want to have some crazy 12, 13% rate, and people don't know whether that goes on perpetually. We think the economics are attractive at 7. It goes on for 18 months. 18 months is roughly the hardware CapEx cycle. So, you feel well amortized over that. You're earning 30% over that. So, people who are pure CapEx or hardware investors will view this as a good value proposition. But if you're comparing to total return of other projects, we're probably at the higher end. But that's because we're giving the upfront discount. The seniorage is actually lower. And we want to keep it that way because we think, as we put out the infrastructure that we're promising, transaction volume should be significant, and we should be able to really abrogate seniorage, hopefully completely soon.
So we will also, Mernal and I have done one of these videos already, and we're going to be doing this on a semi-regular basis. So as information does change, we'll be letting people know. But usually what we're going to try to target is right after the community hangouts on Wednesdays. We won't be doing it every Wednesday, this presentation, but probably on some regular cadence. So if there is an opportunity for other people to catch on, please let them know that's a great place to go. And then as well as all of those additional links here for more information. Thank you.